Hello. Today I am joined by my friend Megan. And Megan and I have known each other for a few years, but mostly on the internets, but we
Mhm.
have met in person a few times too.
Couple
And
times.
so, Megan, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Megan Westra. I am based in Milwaukee. I spent about 10 years in pastoral ministry, primarily in like an evangelical adjacent church, and did 2 years of hospice chaplaincy. And now I teach religion in a high school setting. I grew up very conservative evangelical. I currently identify like mostly with like a post-evangelical kind of framework, and how we can live out our faith in ways that promote justice and equity, the common good, and honoring the image of God in all people, no asterisks involved in that.
And one of the things I appreciate about you is I feel like you have a very ecumenical vibe. We kind of had this conversation a few weeks ago when we talked about just teaching theology. Your students don't come from like one church. And so you have to know how to do this
Yeah.
theology work in this very ecumenical space, which I think is really cool. So,
So I teach in a non-denominational school, which means we catch kind of everybody. I've got students who are Catholic and students who are Pentecostal and students who are Lutheran. And how do we teach a theology that is big enough to help them find the similarities and the differences in all of that and to appreciate those things too, not to try to like be converting each other to their different denominations, but to really see the beauty of how do we get a fuller picture of who God is and the work that the Spirit is doing in the church when we can recognize these differences that we hold.
that's beautiful. I love that. I'm gonna like, I want to copy and paste that. And this is what ecumenism is. So one of the questions that in our that we have been chewing on, because we've been doing this series on juicy questions, and a juicy question you and I came up with is why church? Why do we go to church? Why do we do this church thing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I grew up very, very churched, right? Like I was in the segment of evangelicalism that was like Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, like all the time. Church was probably like my primary social outlet, I would say, when I was growing up. And so why church was never a question that I would have even entertained until I was like well into my mid 20s, right? It was just an assumed like if you're a Christian, you go to church. Like obviously, like duh, like how else are you going to be a Christian? And then I think kind of in my early 20s, as I was starting to pastor, moving to Milwaukee from my small town in West Virginia, getting out into the world, I started to kind of grapple with that a little bit, right? Like, oh, wait, why should people go to church? Why does it matter to go to church? If I'm, you know, pastoring and trying to get people to come to my church, right? Like, how do I make that case to them? Because I don't know if you know this, but like brunch slaps. There's lots of really great ways to spend Sunday mornings that are not gathering with people in a congregation. And sometimes those people are annoying, and sometimes those people don't think the things that I do, and sometimes I just don't feel like it, right? Like I've had a long week, I'd rather sleep in and things like that. And so I think for me, kind of coming to terms with like, but why does this matter, right? Why and not to just give the kind of answer of like, well, this is what Christians do, like this is what God wants from us, but digging into that more of like, but why is this something that is so imperative for people? Because I do think so, right? Like in some ways I've kind of come around full circle to being like, the I think it's Richard Rohr, right, that talks about like you have to have like this established view and then you deconstruct it and then you like reestablish it or something like that. And those aren't the words he uses, I'm butchering it. But this idea of growing up, it was just assumed like, well, yes, Christians go to church. And then kind of coming to this place of being like, I don't know if that's really necessary. And I'm pretty much back in a space of like, no, I think church is pretty essential for following Christ. I don't think it has to look the way that we always imagine church to look, but I think that church in this like broader perspective of what does Christian tradition and scripture point us to is really important.
So what would you say are like the most, when you say church is really important, so what are those pieces? Like what, and maybe that actually is what moves us to what is church?
Yeah, yeah. So when I read like the Christian scriptures, especially the letters, the epistles there at the end, which I know like we have lots of big feelings about Paul and Paul adjacent authors. I, for a long time, was like, I hate this guy. He sucks. Let's take these out. But I've come to like appreciate the letters and even Paul. I think if you look at most of the New Testament, especially the letters, but the Gospels too, if you are looking for evidence that God is at work, that the Spirit is at work in a community, the thing that you see over and over and over again is there is a group of people gathered together caring for the practical physical embodied needs and spiritual emotional support of one another in ways that make absolutely no sense in like the broader cultural context. These people should not be together. They should not care about one another. They should not be supporting one another. Why is this happening? And that happens from who Jesus calls to be the like 12 disciples. If you like don't just skip through those names really quickly and you actually look and you're just like, oh yeah, like having these fishermen and a tax collector and a zealot together in this inner circle would have been like so awkward and so tense. And you know, it starts to make a little more sense why they were always so confused about what Jesus was doing, because like that would be really confusing. All the way through, again, like looking at the letters to the Corinthian church and the Galatian church and like all of these different like churches where it's just like these are not abstract discussions about, you know, how do we manage money and what does it look like to gather and why does it matter what you wear to worship and how do we treat different people and how do we make sure these people are getting food and like can you eat meat or not. These aren't just like weird random questions. They're questions about how do you build community amid difference. And if we're looking for evidence of the Spirit of God at work, evidence that there, you know, that Jesus is Lord, which is a political statement in and of itself, then the evidence of that is in this gathering. You don't get to bear witness to that on your own. This individual, like, oh well, yes, I believe that. Well, then prove it. Like, go be with somebody that it doesn't make sense for you to be around and care for them, not in these abstract, oh, I'm going to show up and I'm going to sing songs next to you, but I'm going to be invested in your flourishing physically, spiritually, emotionally, making sure that you don't have any need in your life.
I love that. One of the things we talk at the council, we talk about churches as centers of justice and community care. And that what you were just, I was like, ooh, this is a nice little box of what that looks like. I led a session last night with a bunch of youth and talked about this and talked about this. Yeah, this is what the church does. It's not just Sunday morning. It's so much bigger and more expansive. So you also teach these sorts of ideas in a school. And can you share some of what these conversations look like with your students?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I raised this question with students, particularly in 11th grade. One of the classes that they teach, there's a whole unit where we grapple with like the question of like, what is the church and why does it matter? And I would say a lot of the reactions I get from kids initially is like, oh, we're not supposed to ask that question. Like, we're not supposed to ask why church is important. We're not supposed to ask what the church is. It feels almost a little taboo for a lot of the kids I've taught, whether it's in my current school or prior to this, I taught in a Catholic school. Because it's just an assumed like you should go to church and you should be a part of church and even challenging that framing with them of like, okay, we're anytime we talk about church, it's always like go to church. Like why is that a thing? Like why are we talking about church primarily as a location? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And so I think when I am engaging with my students, so much of what I'm trying to do is like write little permission slips to ask questions about it. To just be like, no, but you could ask. What if we could ask that question? What if we could grapple with that? What if we didn't assume that? And again, like I'm somebody who has fully circled back around to the assumptions I grew up with. This matters. This is important. You should be there. You should sing songs that you don't like, and like hug people that you think are smelly, and all of these things. And I think it's really important for us to engage in those questions and to ask those questions, and that those questions are actually essential to what being church means. I think especially in my classrooms now, because I'm not in a school that's tied to one specific expression of Christianity, right? That it's interdenominational, it's non-denominational. A lot of it is also inviting students to share, like, what does that look like for you? Students who are coming from traditions like Catholicism, students who are Lutheran, things like that, they're very familiar with words like liturgy and what that looks like. And then there's other students who are like, we don't do liturgy in my church. I'm like, yeah, you do. You just don't call it that. You
You
have
don't
a
use the fancy $10 words.
right. You don't use the words, but when you show up on a Sunday morning and you sing one fast song and then one slow song, and then everybody like, takes time and they all pray, and then somebody comes up and gives announcements, that's liturgy. Like that's just your order. Like that's the work you're doing in that place together as the people, and helping people realize that and look for those commonalities that we often brush past as like, oh, these are differences. It's like, well, no, these are things we hold in common, right? That we do this work together, uh, but it looks different for all of us. And how do we look for the things that are beautiful about other traditions, right? As somebody who grew up across a number of different traditions, right? Born in the United Methodist Church and then became Southern Baptist, and have been in a smattering of other denominations since then, and I'm not in any denomination now. I think one of the things that I appreciate about all of that in my life is there's so much beauty and there's so much expansiveness that I have gotten to experience, and trying to facilitate that in my classroom for my students, right? That aside from you showing up to lots of different church services, which some of them are able to do and some of them are not, right? Some of them, can't get transportation different places, or they, are really invested in their own church community. And I'm like, yeah, sure, you should continue to do that. But to say, like, how do I help them see that the work of God, the way that the Spirit is expressed in a community, the way that people even like relate to it and identify like the work of Christ is so much bigger than just what their individual congregation sees. And so if your congregation is feeling really constrictive for you, or you're grappling with that, that's okay. There's a whole lot of different other ways that people express and experience and think about their Christianity. So if your particular brand isn't working for you right now, that doesn't mean that you have to walk away from Christ. That means maybe you need somebody else to bring you to him, and that's okay.
Mhm. Or sometimes you're in your particularity, you go out, you explore a little, and you'd be like, hey,
And then
actually,
you get back.
this
Yeah, yeah,
fits. I've
absolutely.
done that a few times in my life.
Yes. And that's and helping them see that that's okay, right? Just like normalizing that. And I feel like just broadly that's so much of what teenagers need, is just to be like, oh, that's normal. That's fine. Like just take a breath. I know it feels so big. This is perfectly normal. And I hate to break it to you, but actually you're not gonna like figure this out or arrive, or I hope you don't. Like I hope you don't arrive and settle and just be like, now I know everything. This is good. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, I don't want to answer your questions. I want to teach you to ask better ones. Because I think we always need to keep asking questions. And if we believe in a God who is, big and expansive and infinite and generative and creative and all of these different things, well, then like it's very audacious to assume that we would be able to answer all the questions. And just like, I don't believe in a God that I can know everything about, because I don't think that being would be worthy of worship then.
Makes God very small if you can't like if you can't
Yes.
be asking questions.
Yes.
Yeah. So you do this teaching in your school and you have kind of bigger aspirations. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I am trying to figure out, how do we navigate these digital spaces, the like social media landscape, YouTube, whatever we're calling it. Is YouTube a social media? Is it just the internet? What is YouTube anyway? But navigating those spaces and trying to make sure that we have really good information out there about what different expressions of Christianity look like. And historically, how have Christians thought about different things? How do we engage with the Bible well? And things like that, because there are really loud, prominent voices right now that are uh, projecting and putting forth a version of Christianity that exists and has always existed, but is, I think, not a very helpful way of thinking about the work of Christ and the Spirit. And so I want to make sure that people are having opportunities to engage with a different perspective on faith, right? I hear from people all the time, whether it's my students or friends or parents of my kids' friends and things like that. They're like, oh no, I like you, right? Like if Christians were like you, then like I would be super on board with religion. And I'm like, guess what? Just like I'm
I'm
not the only one
here.
like this. There's more of us. And so just trying to help people again, like I do with my students in my classroom, ask better questions, right? And whether people are religious or not, to say the only way to think about Christianity or Jesus or the Bible is not this uh, traditional family values, Americana, Christian nationalism kind of version that is really, really loud right now.
Mhm.
And to instead say, oh, I'm going to just pick up my own little microphone and put my own voice out there to counter at least a little bit of that. So people can find me at Hey Miss Theology Teacher on Instagram and on YouTube. It's just kind of getting started, but things will be kind of there for people to both explore kind of these, again, like historic and also kind of modern questions, right? Kind of grounding us in this, 2000 plus year tradition of like these questions are not new. These implications are not new. This is not the first time that people have like picked up the name of Jesus and done terrible things with it. So like let's not let's not pretend that this is uncharted territory and be really grounded in how we ask these questions about what it means to live in this present moment.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to talk.